chatting with interesting people. Today we have Kasete. Hello, Kasete.
Hello. Nice to see
Uh,
you.
how are you doing?
I'm good. I'm good. Thank you very much. I'm here in snowy Sweden, up in the north, in the ski resort of Aura, which is where I live. It's currently unseasonably warm today. Actually, it's covered in snow outside, but I think we've got about 5 degrees +5 today, which is sort of quite irregular.
We'll come back to the skiing in a little bit. So let's start off with you're a Londoner.
I was born and I grew up in West London, central West London, Notting Hill, Ladbroke Grove. And I grew up sort of in the 80s and 90s in a very eclectic area with lots of different cultural influences. My mother is English and my father is Tongan. And yeah, I sort of grew up a lot amongst carnival culture, I guess, as well, particularly lots of West Indian culture and North African also.
Yeah, you're Notting Hill Carnival's kind of famous around the world, isn't it? And you grew up right in the middle of that.
Yeah. So like right in the middle. My dad was involved in sort of carnival in the 80s and setting up stages. Yeah, I often think of carnival as being sort of like my Christmas in a way. It's kind of like the year marker for me.
Yeah.
The year sort of begins and ends at carnival.
Yeah, you were the person who introduced me to Carnival, and one of the few people that I would know was always going to be there.
Yeah. Yeah, it's also handy like having I guess living in the middle of carnival and being able to go back to the toilet, I guess, is a key thing.
Most people, I suppose, won't know that there's because it is a massive residential central London kind of area, that there are no or very few toilets that you can put on the streets when there's a couple of million people milling through that area in a short space of time. So
yeah, exactly.
Mm-hmm.
So that's always that's one of the perks of living in the middle of the area. And I've always enjoyed the festivities and the sound systems, the foods, the costumes. I played mass myself and dressed up and been out on the route.
What do you mean by mass?
Mass is like the costume parade, and so actually sort of being part of a costume troupe, I guess, is one way of putting it.
Yeah.
Where everyone dresses up, and that was something we used to do with school when I was a kid. And then I got into playing steel pan, and I played steel pan with a few different groups, but mainly Mangrove. So there, and I guess also for people who don't know much about steel pan, it's when you play at carnival, you play as part of a bigger orchestra. So typically the big orchestras in the UK, of which there are now about 3 or 4 genuinely big ones, are around about kind of 50 to 100 players, depending on the year. It goes up and down. Obviously in Trinidad and Tobago, they're a lot bigger. That's the real sort of kind of spiritual home of Notting Hill Carnival. Is the Trinidad Carnival. But yeah, that's what I moved into after dancing around in costumes. I got into playing steel drums and playing in Panorama, which is the national steel orchestra competition.
Wow, yeah. You're one of those people that whatever you do, you seem to do really well at it.
That's nice to hear. Sometimes I feel like I do lots of different things and never really excel at any of them, but I try.
And music's always been a big part of your life, hasn't it?
Yeah, I think especially, I mean, like Notting Hill's an area that's famous for for different music, different musicians, from people like Hendrix, the Stones, and the Beatles lived around there. Joe Strummer, Bob Marley recorded Exodus, Basing Street Studios in Notting Hill, which is just around the corner from where I lived. And then the whole sound system culture from the West Indies and Carnival. So yeah, it was kind of unavoidable growing up in that part of London.
Yeah.
And even like genres like broken beats came out of Ladbroke Grove. And there are lots of variously big artists.
Several years down the line from there, that's kind of how I met you, where completely different style of music to the the drum and bass, the massive sound systems and all that kind of stuff. And you like opera.
Yeah. Being a musical person, I don't really have any sort of preference for genre. I like a wide range of music, and I kind of appreciate music across the full spectrum. I ended up studying music at Conservatoire, Birmingham Conservatoire. But I also got into opera at quite a young age. I was fortunate enough to have a teacher at school, Carnival Primary School, who liked opera and introduced us to opera. And I was fortunate enough to be able to go and see a couple of operas when I was young. Even at Opera Holland Park, where eventually we met and where I worked for 9 years in the end. So yeah, and it's I really enjoy sort of the mix, the multimedia art forms, of which opera is one, and music often is an accompaniment to things like cinema and dance, and so it sort of naturally involves itself in other art forms.
Yeah, there's something about a live performance, isn't there, that is quite special.
Yeah, definitely. The sound of an orchestra, I mean, it's in a way it's quite similar to steel orchestra, when you have 80 performers all playing together, working together, and creating a sound. It's quite special.
Yeah, and I think when I first met you, you were it was one of your first years there, I think, wasn't it? And you were a steward. I'd come in with my kind of health and safety background, and I'd come in to be the fire officer. And over the years, you've then kind of worked your way through from the steward to.
I ended up as operations manager for 6 years.
And that was basically making sure that everything got set up and in the right places and things, wasn't it?
Yeah. So Opera Holland Park is a big summer opera festival. It's the biggest in London, and they build a big temporary theatre every spring, run the shows across the summer, and take it down in autumn. So it's quite a big undertaking. And I was chiefly responsible for the construction, deconstruction, and management of the venue, but also facilitating the different things that went on at the theatre. So apart from the opera, we also had visiting companies, comedy shows, cinemas, dance, and there's still a range of things that happen there, which is a pretty unique venue and a great place to go and see the show, whatever you're seeing, I think.
Yeah. And are you still doing musical stuff now?
I am, yeah. I've always been involved in bands of various kinds. I've got a small side project that I'm trying to push on with, amongst the many other things that I'm being required to do in my life at the moment.
What's that doing?
So currently I teach English at a high school in Sweden, as well as trying to cram in ski training in between, or gym work, which I've not been able to do enough of this autumn, but Yeah, and then I've got my musical project, which is a band. We haven't got a name yet or anything. It's in embryonic form.
Okay.
And then I've also, growing up in London, I never learned to drive, and now I live in a small village which is fairly isolated, and I've now had the need to drive. So I've been taking driving lessons and doing my test, which I recently passed, which is good. I'm just trying
well
to
done.
work out. Thank you. I'm trying to work out how to acquire a car from somewhere.
You've been involved with big artists, haven't you?
Yeah, one or two. I play occasionally play guitar for a group called Nero, dubstep group. I think they've got some new tracks coming out. One or two of which I've managed to crowbar myself onto. They were friends. Dan, who is 1/3 of Nero, is a friend from school and also a fellow Notting Hiller from back in the day. So yeah, we've done some cool stuff.
Yeah. How did you kind of move from being operations manager at an opera company, doing all this kind of different music, central London, and then suddenly decide that you want to be a skier?
Yeah, it wasn't that obvious, I guess, in a way, looking back at it like that. Basically, I met a Swedish woman who I'm together with currently still. We have a 2-year-old child, which is another thing I'm balancing in amongst all the various things I'm needing to do.
There's the occasional kind of noise in the background, which I'm assuming is because of that.
Yeah. So yeah, when I met her, she invited me to go skiing with her family. They usually go over Christmas each year. And it just, I guess I've always been someone who's kind of, I don't know, I just get into things. And I loved the first time we went skiing. The next time we went back, we went for 10 days rather than 1 week. And the next year we went back for, I think it was 2 weeks, 3 weeks. And then the next time was like a month or something. And it just grew and grew and grew. And I found myself obsessing more and more about the next time I would be able to go back and ski more. And then it sort of came about through a conversation over dinner with friends one evening that maybe I should try and ski for Tonga. There probably couldn't be many other Tongans who were out there skiing, and maybe it could be a fun thing to do or idea to try and represent Tonga in some way in skiing. And it's funny, I guess throughout the whole skiing sort of journey, it's always been about taking very small steps. So the first thing I did was to try and find out if there were any other skiers, and there weren't. Perhaps unsurprisingly for a tiny Pacific island nation.
I was going to ask, whereabouts it was.
Yeah. So Tonga is just a small group of islands in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, right out in the middle. It's about as far away from the UK or Europe as you can get. It's on the opposite side of the world, quite literally.
And they don't have snow.
They don't have snow. They do have mountains, but they're mostly underwater and volcanic. So yeah. And then through sort of just small inquiries here and there, it sort of grew and grew and grew until I finally found that there was actually a Tongan Ski Federation, and that someone was actually trying to find athletes, people, skiers who are willing to kind of try and to go on that journey and represent Tonga. So with the help of Liafa Warwick and Steve Grundman, who is the sports director, and Liafa is the president of the association, we managed to meet up in, I think it was August of 2016. I had a brief, funnily enough, because normally in the summer I was completely flat out with the opera, but I managed to find a small window of opportunity to have 5 days away in Austria to meet up with Steve and have some time on a glacier. And from that kind of came our goal to try and reach the Olympics. And in the end of 2016, I quit my job. I did a crowdfunding to support my skiing, which many kind people, including yourself, supported with the t-shirt there. The t-shirts.
I was going to mention that, yeah.
That I sold as part of my crowdfunding to fund my training and accommodation, and I managed to become the first Tongan to ski at the FIS World Championships in 2017 in Switzerland, St. Moritz.
Amazing.
And then, yeah, so, and I still haven't made it to Olympics. It's an incredibly hard sport to compete in, especially in Europe, when you have all the sort of traditional skiing nations. The standard is very high, and the qualification is based on a kind of relative performance. So if you're measuring yourself against the best skiers, it's incredibly hard to qualify. So yeah, but I haven't given up yet. I've got another World Championships coming up in February, which would be my third. I missed the last one, which was in Italy, mainly due to the costs associated with traveling and competing during the pandemic.
Right, yeah.
Flights were cancelled, hotels and testing, and it just, for smaller nations like Tonga, we don't have the same sponsorship and backing as bigger countries. We don't have a benefactor or someone who's just pumping in money to help us progress. So even small changes in costs can have a big impact on our ability to compete.
You were hoping to be at the Winter Olympics a few years ago, weren't you?
Yeah, so the first Olympics I was aiming for was 2018, and I travelled to New Zealand for the Southern Hemisphere winter in 2017, where I broke my ACL, cruciate ligament, while skiing, which is a very common injury for skiers, and it's also quite a long recovery. So
whereabouts is the ACL? Is that the knee?
It's inside the knee. Yeah, it's a ligament that sort of runs diagonally through the knee. It's the ligament that really kind of gives you your stability when you stand or walk or move. And skiing is a highly unstable sport. it's really vital to have one that's in working order.
Yeah.
And
so how long did that take before you?
It took me 11 months to get back to skiing, which was it's interesting. I remember when I broke it, for the first couple of weeks I was sort of in denial, really, or just hoping that there was something else that could possibly be. And as I progressed through various different doctors who all said the same thing, I was sort of hoping that eventually my scan would show that no, my ACL was fine and it was just something else, but it wasn't. It's generally quite a common sports injury as well. And so in sports like football, especially elite level sports, elite football, you'll see that some athletes are able to make recoveries within 6 to 8 months with the kind of support they have, the types of surgery they have as well, because they might have a synthetic graft. I had a graft that was taken from my hamstring, which is the most common form of graft, and that's probably the best, I think, in terms of long-term recovery. I think the synthetic ACLs have a shorter life.
Okay.
So 11 months was good for me. It also meant that the way it fell with seasons, it meant that I didn't return too quickly. And that actually, when I was finally able to return, I was in really good shape.
If you're enjoying this content, then please do subscribe, follow, like, however your podcast provider puts it. And down in the description, you will find a link to my Patreon. I would be so grateful if some of you check that one out as well. And now, back to the chat.
In terms of my recovery, I quite enjoyed that in the way that there was incremental progress. So I was very lucky to have the injury in New Zealand. In fact, the healthcare is really amazing over there.
Okay.
My personal experience was amazing, and the surgery I had to the surgeon was excellent. And then from that, I think I had a further 3 weeks post-surgery in New Zealand where I was just able to start making small incremental sort of steps. And I mean, literally steps, because it was from not walking to walking aided. And then eventually after about 3 months, I was able to return to running, maybe less, 2 months. And then just building it up. So doing all the things that my various physios were telling me to do. And yeah, I get quite a strong sense of satisfaction from doing those sort of small incremental things to then move on to the next thing that's a slightly higher level, until eventually I was able to get back to skiing again. So yeah.
In terms of the skiing, have you got a particular discipline?
Yeah, so there are 4 disciplines in alpine skiing: slalom, giant slalom, super G, and downhill. And they kind of it's mostly about the size of the turns that you do. So in slalom, you do very small, quick turns. Giant slalom, they're slightly bigger turns. Super G, they're bigger turns again. And downhill, they're the biggest turns. And it goes up in speed. So slalom is the slowest and downhill is the fastest. And I mainly focus on giant slalom, which is kind of like a good middle point. It's the type of alpine skiing that probably most closely relates to ordinary recreational skiing.
Okay.
So it's kind of like an entry point for skiing. I also train in slalom as well, which I should do more of. And my favorite is probably super G, which is fast. So I've been accused of being an adrenaline junkie.
I can't imagine that.
Yeah, I don't know if I say that, but I do really enjoy going very fast. So that's the reason why I enjoy Super G. But as the speed goes up, so does the risk. And I think, yeah, apart from my knee ACL injury, I've also had concussion and I've broken my hand as well whilst skiing. And you become quite aware of your own level of ability. So I would just like to sort of send it down a Super G course. Like, it's always something I need to build up to. When you look at kind of professional alpine skiers, these are people who have been skiing for quite literally all their lives. And I haven't. I came to the sport in my 30s, which is, you know, it's beyond late. And that, so I'm conscious of the fact that my level is, you know, I mean, I've been doing it for about 6 years now. I mean, you know, there are 8-year-olds in Sweden who have been skiing for longer than me. So I shouldn't expect my level to be any more than, you know, a 10 or a 12-year-old or a 14-year-old. And that means that I need to be aware of that when I go into things like Super G, that the other people that I'm training with often are sort of 16 to 18-year-olds who've been doing it for the last 12, 14 years. And I can't afford to take the same risks as them because of my level, and also the brittleness of my bones compared to a teenager's. Is, you know, I don't recover at the same speed as someone that age, and I don't have the same energy, flexibility, and agility as them. And that's stuff that I work as hard as I can on in the gym. So yeah, it's when I starting each season, for me is kind of like it always feels like a big step back, because my improvement across the season is often quite big, because I'm starting from a lower level. It's easy to make bigger improvements. But when I start a new season again after being away for maybe 6 months, it's always kind of a back down to earth moment where I'm reminded of the disparity in technical ability from where I want to be to where I am.
I know you've got to go off training soon, so we briefly mentioned the t-shirts. So do you want to quickly talk us through where that came from?
Yeah. Oh, so these are the t-shirts I designed for my crowdfunding campaign in 2016, which was well supported, gratefully well supported, and the actual design, I did the design myself. It's difficult to kind of see here, but it's based on different Tongan motifs and designs, loosely with a kind of a mountain on the side, but also at the center is like a Tongan fern, which is kind of a sort of, I mean, in generally it's a Tongan cultural symbol, but my brothers and father all have a fern tattoo. So it's kind of a way of bringing my family with me as well.
And your outfit for skiing is designed as well, especially, isn't it?
Yeah, I've got a my racing suit, my speed suit, was designed by my cousin's wife, who is an artist, and she created an incredible design that sort of ties together different cultural aspects of Tonga and my family and my family's history, because my Tongan side of my family comes from Scotland. funnily enough, or a part of it originates from Scotland, from my great grandfather who emigrated to the Pacific about 150 years ago. And so my surname is Skeen, which is the Scottish name, but that comes from my Tongan side. So I've also got some emblems on the suit from that heritage as well.
And you said that's your speed suit. If people are kind of looking at the video, they might notice that you've got fairly prominent hair, which you've been well known for over the years. That doesn't kind of jump out as being particularly aerodynamic.
No, it's not. It's funny that like it's kind of, there aren't many Tongans in the UK or in Europe. I mean, there aren't many Tongans in the world generally, but Tongans are very well-travelled people, and I've got family not only in Tonga but Australia and New Zealand, the west coast of the USA, and other parts of the USA, Texas and New York, and also in London. And Tongans do get around a bit, but growing up with a sense of Tongan cultural heritage, but not necessarily having the community around you, is kind of odd in a way. But one thing that Tongans almost all universally share is quite strong hair, whether they have it short or whether they have it long. So yeah, my hair is quite typically Tongan in its virility, and any Tongan who wishes to grow their hair out can sport something akin to that, which I have today, I'm sure. And it's something that kind of connects me to that side of my heritage as well.
You're at the point where you're trying to compete in various international championships, is that right?
Yeah, there's a World Championships coming up in February, which would be the third that I would have competed in. So that's my main goal for this season, is to get back into training, competing, and have that as my sort of main goal for the season.
And then in order to get to something like the Olympics, you need to have a certain number of
points.
Yeah.
So there's a points threshold. If I achieve a number of points, then I qualify. It's a little bit different for different nations. So, for example, if you come from a big skiing nation like Austria, it's not really enough to have the requisite number of points. You've also got to be selected by your team, because they have lots of people who qualify. But for a small nation like Tonga, where at the moment there's only me, it'd be nice if there were other Tongan skiers as well to compete with. If I cross that points threshold, then I will qualify. So that's my ultimate goal. I suspect that's not something I'll achieve this season, because the threshold is quite high. And at the moment, my plans are to compete in Sweden, where it's particularly difficult to qualify given the standard of the competition here. So for my Olympic qualification points, I might look to travel to some slightly more left field nations, so I compete against a slightly lower level of skier, and it will be easier for me to then make those points. So yeah, that's a kind of beyond this season goal. So now, like with the whole journey, it's been about kind of taking small steps and keeping focused on the kind of immediate goal. There are races coming up in January, which I would like to compete in. So I need to make sure that I'm in the next 2 weeks making good progress in my training to feel confident and comfortable to go into those and actually attack.
Yeah. And if people want to find out more about you or supporting you or anything like that, how do they go about that?
The best place is probably Instagram. I am Tongan skier on Instagram or Twitter or Facebook. Also, I have a Facebook page where people can find me.
And I'll put the links to those up as well. So,
Thanks.
and I'm sure everybody wishes you well with all of that. There's so much going on, and as I said, you do everything really well.
Thank you.
Even the driving, by the sounds of it. So
yeah, the driving's gone okay. That's going to be interesting, especially as I'm looking out the window at about, I don't know, a foot of snow. So yeah, covering the road.
Yeah, and in London, everything comes to a standstill if there's 1 or 2 centimeters.
Yeah. Sadly, my driving test didn't come to a standstill, or luckily, maybe I should say.
Yeah, it's been fantastic, kind of catching up with you. It's a shame it's been so short.
Yeah.
And we wish you well for the championships, and then hopefully we'll see you in the Olympics at some point soon.
Yeah, fingers crossed.
And so thank you very much, Kasete, and thank you to everybody for watching. This is Chatting with Interesting People. This is Kasete, and I will see you soon.